What you're seeing?
Got it.
Okay, perfect. Yay!
Yep.
All right. So HTMA part four, we talked about ratios last time. I'm going to put these up again. These are the three main places you can go to get newsletters and articles. Um, so basically, it's the Trace Elements website and the this is Analytical Research Labs, um, tissue mineral analysis.com. So ARLTMA.com. Um, So the ratios, which one is on the title? So this isn't a trick question. What is considered the most important ratio? What do we look at first when we're looking at imbalances?
Is it copper zinc?
Nope.
No.
Anybody else?
Sodium, potassium,
Yes, sodium and potassium.
vitality.
Um, Sodium and potassium ratio is going to be the most important because we talked about that sodium potassium pump, right? Um, and it's how cells maintain fluid balance. So we know that hair sodium level is a marker for how aldosterone, the mineral corticoid hormone, is working in your body, and potassium is a marker for how glucocorticoid hormones are working, specifically cortisol. Let me stop right there. Who needs more reminders on what those two things are? I have to look it up, so don't be shy. It is definitely something that um, I need to remind myself of over and over. So
Are you talking about the things that you've listed there that you've talked about
right
there?
here, aldosterone and glucocorticoid and mineral corticoids. Is anybody fuzzy on how they work in the kidneys and all that jazz?
I would
Uh,
like that.
I would like it too. A
Okay.
good review, yeah.
Okay. We are going to kind of, there's a couple videos I can actually, I put them at the end, but let me kind of go through. Um, okay. So this one, this is 9 minutes. It does a really great job of explaining. It's a crash course, and there's this one and another one, but this is pretty good.
Most important things that our bodies do is main.
Are you guys hearing the video?
Yep.
Okay,
Maintain this thing
perfect.
called homeostasis. It's a regulation of a stable internal environment no matter where we are or what we're doing. After all, we put our body through a lot every single day. We're always adding food and liquid and chemicals, and we're constantly changing temperature and our levels of activities, but our bodies can roll with it. It's like no big deal for them. All of our organ systems have some hand in maintaining homeostasis. I mean, it's basically the thing that makes us not dead. But the excretory system, aka the urinary system, which includes the kidneys, the ureters, the bladder, and the urethra, is the star quarterback of the homeostasis team. That's because your excretory system is responsible for maintaining the right levels of water and dissolved substances in your body. This is called osmoregulation, and it's how our bodies get rid of the stuff we don't need, like the byproducts of metabolizing food, while also making sure that we don't get dehydrated. It's the body's greatest balancing act, and your body is doing it right now and all of the time, as long as you're not dead. Other organ systems we've talked about, not all excretory systems in the animal kingdom are created equal. Different animals excrete wastes different ways based on their evolutionary history, what environments they live in, and what their hobbies and interests are. These factors all influence how an animal regulates water, and most metabolic waste needs to be dissolved in water in order to be excreted. The problem is, a main byproduct of metabolizing food is ammonia, which comes from breaking down proteins, and it's pretty toxic. So depending on how much water is available to an animal and how easy it is for the animal to lug a bunch of water around inside it, animals convert this ammonia into either urea or uric acid. Mammals like us, as well as amphibians and some marine animals like sharks and sea turtles, convert ammonia into urea, a compound made from combining ammonia and carbon dioxide in their livers. The advantage of urea is its very low toxicity. It can hang out in your circulatory systems for a while with no ill effects, but you have to have some extra water available to dissolve it and get rid of it. This isn't such a tall order, really. I mean, peeing isn't a huge inconvenience. I mean, is it? It's not for me, anyway. Well, it would be, though, if you were a bird or an insect or a lizard living in the desert. Animals that have to be light enough to fly or don't have a bunch of spare water hanging around convert ammonia into uric acid, which can be excreted as kind of paste, so not a lot of water is needed. Using bird poop, if you haven't taken a close look, next time do that. Just look, the white stuff, the bird droppings, is actually the uric acid EP, and the brown stuff is the poop. So now that we've established what is and what is not bird poop, let's get down to the brass tacks of how humans get all of this urea out of our blood and into our toilets. The excretory system starts with the kidneys, the organs that do all the heavy lifting from maintaining those levels of water and dissolved materials in our bodies to controlling our blood pressure. And even though they do an amazing job, I'm not bad-mouthing your kidneys here. The way that they do it is frankly a little bit janky and inefficient. To start out by filtering a bunch of fluid and the stuff dissolved in the fluid out of your blood, and then they basically reabsorb 99% of it back before sending that 1% on its way in the form of urine. Seriously, 99% gets reabsorbed. On an average day, your kidneys filter out about 180 liters of fluid from your blood, but only 1.5 liters of that ends up getting peed out. So most of your excretory system isn't dedicated to excreting, it's dedicated to reabsorbing. But the system works. Obviously, I'm still alive, so we can't argue with that. Now it is time to get into the nitty-gritty details of how your kidneys do all this, and it's pretty cool. But there's lots of weird words, so get ready. Your kidneys do all this work using a network of tiny filtering structures called nephrons. Each one of your mango-sized kidneys has about 1 million of them. Don't do this, but if you were to unravel all of your nephrons and put them end to end, they would stretch over 80 kilometers. This is where all the crazy action happens. So to understand how they work, we're just gonna follow the flow from your heart to the toilet. Blood from the heart enters the kidneys through renal arteries, and just so you know, whenever you hear the word renal, it means we're dealing with kidney stuff. As the blood enters, it's forced into a system of tiny capillaries until it enters a tangle of porous capillaries called the glomerulus. This is the starting point for a single nephron. The pressure in the glomerulus is high enough that it squeezes some of the fluid out of the blood, about 20% of it, and into a cup-like sac called the Bowman's capsule. The stuff that gets squeezed out is no longer blood. It is now called filtrate. It's made up of water, urea, some smaller ions and molecules like sodium, glucose, and amino acids. The bigger stuff in your blood, like the red blood cells and the larger proteins, they don't get filtered. Now the filtrate is ready to be processed. From the Bowman's capsule, it flows into a twisted tube called the proximal convoluted tubule, which means the tube near the beginning, and that is all windy. Why are we so bad at naming things? Anyway, this is the first of 2 convoluted tubules in the nephron, and these, along with other tubules we're talking about, are where the osmoregulation takes place. With all kinds of tricked out specialized pumps and other kinds of active and passive transport, they reabsorb water and dissolve materials to create whatever balance your body needs at the time. In the proximal tubule, it's mainly organic solutes in the filtrate that are reabsorbed, like glucose and amino acids and other important stuff that you want to hang on to. But it also helps to recapture some sodium and potassium and water that we're going to want later. From here, the filtrate enters the loop of Henle, which is a long hairpin-shaped tubule that passes through the 2 main layers of the kidney. The outermost layer is the renal cortex. That's where the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule and both convoluted tubules are. And the layer beneath that is the renal medulla, which is the center of the kidney. Cortex, by the way, is Latin for tree bark, so whenever you see it in biology, you know that it's the outside of something. Medulla, on the other hand, meaning marrow or pith, so you know that it's the inside, just to help you remember this stuff. But before we take a tour of this amazing loop, I have to do a couple of things. First, go pee, because this is, and second, a biography. So I'll be right back. Of Henle was discovered by 19th century German physician and anatomist Friedrich Gustav Jacob Henle. And I'm pretty sure he was just one of those guys that you can't gross out because he spent most of his career dissecting kidneys and eyeballs and brains, and also seemed to be a huge fan of mucus and pus. He was, by far, the most important anatomist of his time. His 3-volume Handbook of Systematic Human Anatomy was recognized as the definitive anatomy textbook of its day, and was famous for its exquisite attention to detail and its intricate, even beautiful illustrations. Not only did Henle discover the loop of Henle, arguably the linchpin of kidney function in mammals, he was also an early adopter of the wildly unpopular germ theory of disease. His student, Robert Koch, is considered to be one of the founders of microbiology, and the two worked together to formulate the Henle-Koch postulates, which today remain the 4 conditions that must be met to establish a causal relationship between a microbe and a disease. Henle taught the world so much about the human body that there are right now, in you, no fewer than 9 features that bear his name. From the Henle's fissures between the muscle fibers of your heart to the crypts of Henle, which are microscopic pockets in the whites of your eyes, also the name of my cradle of filth cover band. All right, so review time. We've squeezed some filtrate out of the blood and reabsorbed some of the important organic molecules we want to keep. But most of the reabsorption action happens here in the loop of Henle, which does 3 really important things. 1, it extracts most of the water that we need from the filtrate as it travels down to the medulla. 2, it pumps out the salts that we want to keep on the way back up to the cortex. And 3, in the process of doing all that, it makes the medulla hypertonic or super salty relative to the filtrate, creating a concentration gradient that will allow the medulla to draw out even more water one last time from the filtrate before the final journey to the toilet begins. It's complicated and, again, kind of janky, but it's what allows us mammals to create urine that's as concentrated as necessary, using only the amount of water that our bodies can spare at the time. So first, filtrate starts going down the loop, and the thing to know here is that the membrane is highly permeable to water. Not so much to salt or anything else, mainly water. Now, compared to the filtrate, the tissue of the medulla is already pretty salty, and as the filtrate processes, the surrounding tissue becomes increasingly hypertonic. The farther down you go, the saltier it gets. So applying everything that we've learned about osmosis, you know that as the filtrate moves along, it loses more and more water through the membrane. By the time the filtrate gets to the bottom of the loop, it's highly concentrated. And now the filtrate enters the ascending end of the loop, and here it's basically the same, but in reverse. The membrane is not permeable to water, and instead it's lined with channels that transport ions like sodium, potassium, and chlorine. And because the filtrate is so concentrated now, it's actually hypertonic compared to the fluid outside in the medulla. So as it ascends, huge amounts of salts start flowing out of the filtrate, which makes the renal medulla really, really, really salty. This salty medulla also creates a concentration gradient between the medulla and the filtrate, which we're gonna need in the final step of pee making. But first, once the filtrate is back up in the cortex and out of the loop, it enters the second of our convoluted tubules, called the distal convoluted tubule, or farther away curly tube. While the first tubule worked mostly in the reabsorbing of organic compounds in the filtrate, here the focus is on regulating levels of potassium, sodium, and calcium. This work is mainly done by pumps and hormones that regulate the reabsorption process. By the time it's done, we have finally taken everything we want to keep out of the filtrate. So now it's mainly just excess water, urea, and other metabolic waste. This stuff all gets dumped into collecting ducts that channel it back down to the center of the kidney, the medulla. And remember, the medulla is super salty, right? Now, more hormones kick in that tell the collecting ducts how porous to make their membranes. If the membranes are made very porous, more water is absorbed into the medulla, which makes the urine, yes, we can start calling it urine now, even more concentrated. And here's a fun fact. If you've ever had one drink too many, you might have noticed that you start to pee a lot, and your pee is clear. That's because alcohol interferes with these hormones, especially one called antidiuretic hormone, which tells the collecting ducts to be very porous so that you reabsorb most of the water. With those hormones all confused and out of commission, you just start peeing out all kinds of water, which also means you're getting dehydrated, which means you're officially on a one-way trip to Hangover City. So now you know why that happens. Now at this point, the urine leaves both kidneys and flows down to the urinary bladder by tubes called ureters. Once in the bladder, the urine just sits around waiting for us to decide when it's time to find a bathroom. And when that time comes, the little sphincter muscle relaxes and releases the urine from the bladder into a tube called the urethra, which empties out wherever you point it. So that's how your excretory system works, and that's basically how it works for most mammals, although some modifications are made based on, again, where they live and what they do. For instance, Kangaroo rats, which are tiny and adorable and live in the desert, have the most concentrated urine of any animal anywhere because it can't spare the water. So it has a very, very long loop of Henle that reabsorbs most of the water from the filtrate. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the beavers, who have very short loops of Henle because they're like water reabsorption, smarter reabsorption. Do you see what I do all day? So now you know the true origins of pee. Thank you for coming to learn with us here at Crash Course Biology. We hope that you learned something.
All right.
That was awesome.
So he has a whole bunch of different ones, and you can go back. I will give you guys the link to that. There's also one here, and it kind of goes through everything. And this is the guy, Professor Zach Murphy. And this is more technical on the hormonal side of it. So let me see. This one is, oh, hang on. This one's also 10. Oh, how did I do that?
Boy, I
Totally.
wish I would have had those videos 30 years ago to understand the kidney function. That was difficult.
Yeah, and guys, it's not easy. Like it's when he says it's janky, he's absolutely right. Um, so if you need to watch it again and again, but this one I think is super helpful. It is 10 minutes. We can watch this one too because this actually talks about how the hormones work. So now that you know the basic anatomy and how a kidney nephron works, this talks about how the adrenal glands and the hormones affect it, which is the other half of the story. All right?
Engineers, so we talked in great detail about the adrenal gland, right? We went over in a lot of specific details. What I want to do now is I just want to get a quick overview of the adrenal gland, what stimulates it, what's its target organs, and some of the negative feedback mechanisms, okay? All right, so where do we have to start? We have to start in the hypothalamus. Now, there's a specific nucleus located in the hypothalamus. And again, it's the nucleus that's actually going to be in this area. If I were to draw, here's the actual neuron here. It secretes what hormone? This hormone that it secretes is called corticotropin releasing hormone. What's the nucleus that actually secretes this? This is the paraventricular nucleus. What does the corticotropin releasing hormone do? It circulates down through the hypophyseal portal system and stimulates specific cells located in the anterior pituitary. Those are called corticotropes. And when the corticotropin releasing hormone circulates down through the hypophyseal portal system and stimulates this corticotrope, the corticotrope secretes two different chemicals. One we're going to focus on and one we're not going to talk about. One is alpha MSH, because we talked about that in the large detailed video. And then the important one, which is adrenocorticotropic hormone. All right, so now what's the function of adrenocorticotropic hormone? Okay, adrenocorticotropic hormone can go to this adrenal gland here, right? So the adrenal gland has two components that we talked about. If you look at these blue cells, these red cells, and these green cells, all of these three layers make up what's called the adrenal cortex. And in the middle of the adrenal gland is going to be the adrenal medulla. So what does adrenocorticotropic hormone do? Let's follow it to the adrenal cortex. So it comes over here, circulates through the blood, and it acts on a bunch of different receptors on these cells, right? So let's go ahead and remember these basic cells here. What was this blue cell layer here called? This blue cell layer here was called the zona glomerulosa. This red cell layer here is called the zona fasciculata. And this green cell layer here is going to be the zona reticularis. What the adrenocorticotropic hormone does is it can act on all of these three cells. Let's show that here. Look, it's coming in here and it bifurcates and it can act on these three cells. So it can stimulate the zona reticularis, it can stimulate the zona fasciculata, and it can stimulate the zona glomerulosa. Now, there is other stimuli here. We'll talk about that in just a second. What is the zona glomerulosa responsible for secreting? It secretes chemicals And these chemicals are controlling your mineral balance, so they're called mineral corticoids, right? What was the main one that we talked about? Aldosterone, right? And we'll talk about him in just a second and his effects. Then, what else? Adrenocorticotropic hormone can act on the zona fasciculata, and it can stimulate the zona fasciculata to control certain types of metabolic activities with respect to glucose, right? And these are called glucocorticoids. Now, the specific one that we talked about is cortisol. Okay. And then it can also, the adrenocorticotropic hormone can stimulate the zona reticularis to produce things that are going to affect your gonads, or the ovaries or the testes. And these are called gonadocorticoids. Now, we talked about these already. We're just going to call them androgens, right? But the specific ones were androstenedione and DHEA, dehydroepiandrosterone. Okay. Now that we've done that, what is some other stimuli here for the zona glomerulosa? Because I want to talk about him too. It's not just the adrenocorticotropic hormone, because he was one of the big ones, right? So again, what hormone is stimulating this process here? We were to follow it out here. It's the adrenocorticotropic hormone, right? What is it doing? It's acting on the zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, and zona reticularis. There's other signals here. What is these other signals here? Other things could be for the zona glomerulosa could be angiotensin 2. What is another signal here? It could be low plasma sodium ions and high potassium ions in the plasma, right? And this is stimulatory. This is stimulatory, but they can also receive another signal here. It's not significant. It's from atrial natriuretic peptide, and it's inhibitory. Now, angiotensin 2, we talked about him already. He's important for being able to increase your blood pressure. These sodium ions are helping to stimulate the production of aldosterone, and atrial natriuretic peptide is trying to inhibit the production of aldosterone. And adrenocorticotropic hormone can have an effect on the zona glomerulosa to produce aldosterone. All right, so we've made all of these different types of sex hormones, glucocorticoids, and mineralocorticoids. One more thing is the adrenal medulla. So if you look here in the adrenal medulla, we already talked about him. He's actually made up of nervous tissue, right? So neural tissue. So he has the postganglionic motor neurons in here. And when it's stimulated by the sympathetic nervous system, right, through the thoracolumbar output, it can secrete what? What are the chemicals it secretes? Epinephrine and norepinephrine. And we talked about these in great detail, right? They help to be able to stimulate gluconeogenesis, glycogenolysis, and lipolysis, right? And increase your blood pressure. Okay, so what are these guys' effects in whole? Increase BP, increase glycogenolysis, and they increase what's called gluconeogenesis, and they increase what's called lipolysis. Okay, now we've done these guys. What's the effect of mineralocorticoids? Let's look at it over here. So what was that hormone that we talked about? Aldosterone. He affects the kidney, specifically in the distal convoluted tubule, right? And what's his overall function? He helps to be able to create sodium reabsorption. So pull sodium from the kidney tubules into the blood, right? And then he excretes out potassium. But as a result of the sodium moving in, who else follows? Water. So what's the overall result here? You increase blood volume and you increase blood pressure. Okay? And you also increase the sodium content. All right? So you end up what's called hypernatremia. Okay? But this could, not necessarily pathological. Okay. What was the other thing over here? It was with respect to cortisol. So here's our cortisol over here, right? So cortisol did a lot of things. What did it do? It acted on the white blood cells, your immune system. What does it do to the immune system? It suppresses the immune system, right? By inhibiting the release of a lot of different cytokines. So it suppresses the immune system. What does it do to the muscles? You remember it's actually a very, very chronic stress hormone, right? So it can assist in what's called protein catabolism. So it can break down proteins into amino acids. what can it do here to the fat tissue? It can cause the fat tissue to undergo lipolysis, right? So it breaks down triglycerides into fatty acids and glycerol. And it can stimulate the liver to do what's called a very, very important process, and that process is called gluconeogenesis. Okay, so it can take amino acids and convert amino acids into glucose. It can take glycerol and convert it into glucose, tons of different things here, right? And it can also enhance the sympathetic nervous system's effects, right, by increasing the adrenergic receptors. All right, so that's cortisol. All right, so we talked about cortisol, we talked about aldosterone, we talked about epinephrine and norepinephrine. Let's finish up with these gonadotropins. They're nothing that we're going to spend a lot of time on, and the reason why is they're so insignificant. They're very, very weak. I should actually put here, very weak. But what they do is these androgens can act as precursors. So if, for example, if I wanted to go to the female, it could be used to make estrogen. If I take it to the male can use that to make it into testosterone. But their overall functions of the gonadotropins, primarily, if we were to just kind of overlay their entire function, it's to control libido, so sex drive, okay? All right, so now that we know that we understand what cortisol does, aldosterone does, and gonadotropins does. Now, real quickly here, with the cortisol, this is the one I really want to talk about. If you're making, because what happens, adrenocorticotropic hormone stimulates your zona fasciculata to make cortisol. What happens if your cortisol levels rise really, really high? They exert a negative feedback mechanism. So let's say here's our cortisol. It exhibits a negative feedback mechanism. What do? You make less corticotropin releasing hormone. You make less adrenocorticotropic hormone. And then that triggers the zona fasciculata to not make as much cortisol. That's that negative feedback mechanism. Now, if it was the exact opposite, if there's less cortisol, there's going to be less inhibitory input, right? So there's going to be less of that negative feedback mechanism there. It's going to cause them to make what? More corticotropin releasing hormone. More corticotropin releasing hormone will actually stimulate the anterior pituitary gland to make more ACTH, and more ACTH will stimulate the zona fasciculata to make more cortisol. All right, guys, so I hope that made sense. In this video, we covered a general overview of all the adrenal gland hormones.
All right.
Boy, that was good too.
Yes, and there are definitely more that go specifically into aldosterone and cortisol, and I don't want to take up more time, but he does a really great job, and I am so much of a visual person. Having him color code and draw is just makes my heart just like I'm like, yay!
Me too. Are these on YouTube, Joe?
They are on YouTube. I will make sure that you guys get the links to them.
Thank you.
So I do have
Yeah, you'll post that in Telegram somewhere.
yes,
Okay.
I will. So, but that makes it so much easier then. Okay, let me boom, 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 boom. Close your eyes while I go all the way back. So that makes it a lot easier when we're looking at the sodium potassium ratio. We know that that sodium level now, right, is a marker. We can look at that and say, how is aldosterone working in the body? And the potassium level is a marker for the glucocorticoid, specifically cortisol. And we can look at this ratio and say what we're looking at is the balance of mineralocorticoids to glucocorticoids, or aldosterone to cortisol. So I took this next part and I kind of did this because I'm a visual person. So, it's the sodium to potassium ratio is the mineralocorticoid aldosterone to cortisol. When it's high, right, you have more aldosterone than you have cortisol. And that's usually an acute stressor, acute stress that's happening. Right? So think about it. Like we always talk about how stress burns through minerals, right? And so when you have this high stress, you're really pushing out more sodium, right, into the bloodstream, right, and more water. Um, and then the opposite, you have if it's low and it's chronic, and now we're working on, all right, now the stress is here, cortisol is ruling the, running the game. We're going to have less aldosterone, more cortisol, less sodium, more potassium. Does that make more sense now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
So higher
Go ahead. I'll go back.
sodium shows higher levels of cortisol because it's being pushed out into the.
Higher levels of sodium
Mhm.
means that aldosterone is working. It's pushing more sodium into the bloodstream. So you're going to see more sodium on a blood test, on a hair test, hair tissue mineral analysis too. You should see the body excreting more sodium.
So how is this all going to be affected by somebody, let's say, that has had chronic type 2 diabetes for, several decades and has some, end stage renal disease or some compromise there?
It could be different. I mean, this is the thing.
You have to know your client.
You have to know your client. Exactly. It's the same thing that we teach in blood work. And that's why we can't just look at one level, one number, one whatever, right? I mean, you can have people that are diabetic and for whatever reason, kidneys are great, it's affecting something somewhere else, right?
Right.
It's not their kidney function, they've got more neuropathy. It's more of a nervous system issue for them, or more of an eyesight issue for them, or right. We've all seen those things where you're like, that can't possibly be right. Right? You've all had the clients that are shockingly one way or the other, and we're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So it's back down to foundational. Where is this person right now? What do I know about them right now? And maybe they're on some medication they forgot to tell you about. Maybe they're, you know, on some crazy no salt diet, right? So they don't have any salt in their diet at all. So they're running at a deficiency level. What's that going to do to these numbers? So you really, really, really have to know your client. But you need to understand like what these ratios are representing, and just because the ratio can represent 10 things, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that they're all true for your client. So you're going to get a report back from the HTMA lab, and it's going to say, hey, a low sodium level or a high sodium potassium ratio means XYZ. But it's just like pulling out the Weatherby book and saying high elk phos means, could be these 8 things for your client. It doesn't necessarily mean all those things are true. It's just a list of possibilities. Got it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the sodium potassium ratio is considered the most important ratio on a test. And if there's a number of imbalances on the HTMA when you get it back, it's best to focus on correcting this one first. These minerals help us understand the adrenals and the kidneys and are affected by stress, inflammation, and an anti-inflammatory response as well. So this is the single most important ratio to assess the immune system. When it's low, it's called an inversion. So a low ratio, I had one on one of my last ones was like 0.4, and then it managed to get up to 1, and I was like, yay! You're looking for it to be, I believe 2.4 is the number, or 2.6, I think. I can't remember. Like I said, I don't keep some of these things in my head. I have to look them up. That's why I have all the tools available, right? So a low ratio indicates the immune system is weak. It also indicates a chronic adrenal weakness. It can indicate fatigue and tissue catabolism. So if you think back to, when they said cortisol's high, right? When cortisol is high, it's going to affect the muscles and proteins. It's going to, your body's going to self destruct. It needs to get energy from wherever it can. And if you've got, if this is chronic, it's been going on for a very long time, stress overtly stops digestive secretions, which is going to lower the body's ability to actually digest and get nutrients from its food. So the longer it goes on, the more chance that the body's going to be pulling from whatever it can. And so you get that protein breakdown in the muscles. Um, it indicates a loss of potassium from damaged cells, right? Because potassium lives inside the cell. Um, so you're going to have lower sodium, higher potassium. Um, and that So you're going to get that higher potassium to sodium. And then the sodium ratio shows us our overall vitality, our overall adrenal health, our overall liver and kidney function, overall digestion, and how our body is reacting to stress. Um, I said on my HTMA report that I show my clients, I do not call this the life-death ratio. I don't put the word death. There's just too much of a negative connotation here. And if they're in this inversion and super stressed and it's bad, the last thing I want to do is add to their stress and tell them that their life death ratio is tipping toward death. And I'm not a stressy person, but when mine had some pattern that was called the stairway to heaven or whatever pattern it was, I was just like, they're like, yeah, that means you're like getting closer to dying. I'm like, what? So I don't like using any of those terms because it's just more stressful.
Who names those, Joe?
Ah, you know, I don't know. I mean, it's true. I mean, right? I mean, if your body has been under stress for so long that you've broken your digestive system and it's eating its own muscles to provide you with amino acids to make things to make you alive one more day, right? It is. You have tipped the scale, right? From thriving to surviving. You're in survival mode. And I can say that to my client, you're in survival mode, but I don't say, hey, you're closer to death than you are to life. There's just better ways to put it. So, um, so a high sodium to potassium ratio shows a possibility of inflammation, adrenal imbalance. It's usually that acute stress situation. It's the beginning stage. I don't like the word fatigue. I should probably X that out. But the beginning stages, of adrenal imbalance, um, it could be asthma, allergies, right? The body's, if you're in that early on stage of stress and imbalance, then your body is going to be more hypervigilant, right? Um, before the body's, pulled the emergency brake on you. It's a more common ratio with fast oxidizers, with that fast metabolism. It could be a sign of kidney and liver stress. A high sodium potassium, a high ratio is considered preferable to a low ratio, right? And that makes sense. If it's acute, if it's just begun, you've just had the trauma, you've just had the stressor, it's maybe,
These
whatever.
these are all based on HTMA, not on like a serum, right?
Correct.
Okay, so
Correct.
and on our, I'm not familiar with reports because I haven't gotten any yet.
Yeah.
But does it on the report, it actually gives you ratios, or do you have to figure out the ratios
No,
yourself?
it gives you the ratio and it's a graph. It's pretty simple to look at and go, oh my gosh, that's high, that's low.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thanks.
And then it'll actually say it on like page 2 or 3 of the report. It'll say a high sodium potassium ratio, and it'll list some of this stuff. But you need to decide, right? Maybe your patient has no allergies and does not have asthma, right? So you're not going to like tell your client, "Oh, you have a high ratio, you're probably going to start being allergic to things." You wouldn't do that, right? So it's just one marker, just like anything else. It's just one puzzle piece. But it is a puzzle piece that can tell you a lot about so many things if you understand the biochemistry behind sodium and potassium. So, a low ratio shows the possibility of kidney and liver dysfunction, allergies, arthritis, tissue breakdown, the low immune system, right? Because cortisol suppresses immune function, and a low sodium potassium ratio is a cortisol dominant state. Adrenal exhaustion or burnout, once again, it's not, the adrenals are functioning fine, right? If you go back, look at the video, look at that chart that he put up there, the adrenals are doing exactly what they're meant to do. They're not burnt out, right? The person might feel burnt out, but the body's pulling the emergency brake for a reason. I really, really, really dislike anytime we somehow label something and give the client the idea that something's broken. The body's just reacting to the environment it's in. It's still reacting, or they'd be dead. So the body's just doing what it needs to do to survive one more day, one more hour, one more minute, whatever. Digestive problems, right? This is a stress ratio. Low sodium potassium is a sign of chronic stress. So you're going to have digestive problems, especially low stomach acid. It's very common in slow oxidizers, right? If the body's in stress, it's not digesting, its metabolism, it's running on, whatever the body can come up with, right? It's running on cortisol, it's running on whatever. It's not working to make everything function great. It's got the alarm bells are going off. Low sodium potassium ratios that are hard to budge can be due to a history of trauma. Um, and it's been known to have, child abuse victims, as an example, tend to have very low sodium potassium ratios. Once again, a statement I don't like because not everybody with a low sodium potassium ratio is a child abuse victim, right?
So are what you call four lows then more likely to be in that category? Because, bless you. Um,
Thanks. I was trying to sneeze off.
well, you were, but I could see you sneezing. It's a force of habit. So I mean, just because your minerals are all low, so obviously you don't have anything really to work on. I mean, you don't,
It
you don't
could be. I mean, I can show you the one that I put up before, Lee, with the two, where they were low, but there was definitely more of a pattern to it. And then
right.
as we replenished from a low state, the first thing that happened was some of them went low, but they were more balanced. So 6 months after starting this kid on, a rebalancing program, the minerals were still low, but they were more balanced. So it's very, very difficult to move patterns and to replenish people who are low. It is a very slow process because you don't want to take somebody, that has the emergency brake on and all of a sudden, you know, put the pedal to the metal and hit the gas to the floor, right? You have to take the emergency brake off and then slowly start the car again. So it's when you have ratios like the sodium potassium ratio, um, I'd rather see the minerals be low across the board and have the ratio be better. But everybody, sometimes it's two steps back before you can take a step forward.
Okay.
So, especially with HTMA, you need to let your clients know things might look worse on an HTMA before they look better. It's very possible that you do all the right things and blood levels, everybody's like so happy because blood levels bounce back so fast, right? But tissue levels take a longer time to get replenished.
Right.
It just does.
Jill, am I remembering right when you're talking about the adrenals and everything that Jen really disliked the term adrenal fatigue? She
Oh
said
yeah.
there's no such thing.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Exactly. The
Okay.
adrenals are doing exactly what they need to do in the environment the person has their body in. Right? They're working. Now they may be tapping the emergency brake, but they're working. So you have to, that's the whole thing. I do not like the term either because it makes people think that something's broken, that they're just, you know, that their body's doing something wrong, but the body is just reacting to a period of prolonged stress, right? And when your body's been under stress for a very long time, it needs rest. And if you're not going to rest it, if you're just going to drink coffee and do high-powered workouts and power through like our society wants you to do, this client that I'm working on now is in a four lows and she wants to be moving. She's ready. Like every time she has to nap, she thinks that she's being lazy and she's letting her kids down. But what everybody in that situation has to realize is this is what your body's asking for. And until you can replenish the foundations, until you can get your body hydrated and digesting and getting sufficiency of nutrients, you're not going to be able to run a marathon. Your hike is going to be a nature stroll. So, and you can't push it.
Some of the problem is I find is that if you've got a client like that, they're using stimulants throughout the day of different types to basically get them through the day. And then all of a sudden, when you tell them you need to stop those, or, in order to allow your body to come back to a point of rest, of true rest, they crash and they can't tolerate it because they can't get anything done.
Yeah. And it is one of those things where it's courageous in our day and age to actually step back and lower the amount of boxes that you need to check. It's not an easy thing to do, especially if you're the one if you're the single parent now, if you're the one working 2, 3 jobs to make ends meet, if you're the one, right, on the other side of whatever it is that you have to. But they have to also, you have to educate your client and be able to show them all the different ratios, all the different things, all the different blood labs, all the different signs. Like, they've come to you for a reason. If they're not going to take your advice, it's in educating the client to let them know that this is what their body is asking for. You're not tired because you need more caffeine, right? You're tired because you are constantly stepping on the gas in a car that's put on the emergency brake. And what you're experiencing is that metal on metal burning, steaming, like all the things that happen when you try and do opposite of what your body's asking for. And it is hard. So the sodium, potassium, vitality, adrenal, or life death ratio, which I never, never, never use for our stress response. So when the ratio is high, it's going to signal that initial fight or flight response. And you've got internal versus external stressors. Um, and what are those differences that we've discussed? I mean, and we may not have, but what's the, we all know that there's different things that can happen internally versus externally when you talk about stress. You guys want to give some examples?
Well, like an internal stress would be like an infection or dysbiosis, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And the external is obviously, could be emotional, it could be chemical, um, could be physical. Although your internal could also be physical, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's important that there's so many people that are like, well, I'm not stressed, but they've been living in mold, or they have Lyme that they don't know about, or, whatever it is, raging dysbiosis, all the things that we talk about, whatever toxic exposures. So trying to figure out for them, what is going into this response, because a lot of times people will have some high ratio and they're like, they don't really recognize the difference. And even just the daily grind for some people turns into just, I mean, I remember being in college, having to get from class to class to class, being an RA, being working a job, right? And I didn't ever have like a job where I just sat around and like shelved books at the library at my own pace, right? It was always jobs that were like high pressure, high stress. If anybody's worked in like retail during the holidays or fast food restaurants during a rush, like these jobs that we had, um, these lower paying jobs sometimes can be super, super stressful. I think about my son, who's an air traffic controller, and even all the things that they put in place to help mitigate that external stressor. But it's one of the most stressful jobs in the country that he just took on. So
Yes, tell him thank you.
I will. So it is the single most important ratio to assess what the immune system is doing. So the low ratio is going to indicate that they have some immune system suppression. Um, it's going to indicate chronic adrenal weakness, fatigue, right? It means that the body is preferentially slowing things down, right? The preferentially saying, cut it out. um, and tissue catabolism, right? If we're in this state where the immune system is weak, we know that the muscles are breaking down. Um, we're going to lose potassium from damaged cells. So as the muscles are breaking down to scavenge amino acids, we're going to lose that potassium. So that's why the potassium is going to be higher in relation to the sodium. Um, That's just the same thing, highlighting the damaged cells. And you could look at that. What other, I know we have a whole bunch of stuff going on, but have you guys heard the term acute phase reactant? Numbers on blood labs that raise when there's oxidative stress. What's one of the, what's a number that you would look at on a blood lab that would go up because the body was under a lot of oxidative damage, a lot of oxidative stress?
Ferritin?
Ferritin's one, yep. Ferritin is another thing that lives inside a cell. So when ferritin goes super, not just a little elevated, but really elevated. When you see ferritin 150, 200, I mean, seen some crazy high ferritin numbers, right? It's an acute phase reactant. It means there's cellular damage in the body. Um, but there's a whole list of them. But that's the one that comes to mind first, too. So kudos to whoever jumped in on that one. I don't know who you were. I don't know why that isn't. This is just this was a picture of the sodium potassium pump, the one that I sell that I showed you guys that has both ways, but it's not there. I don't know why it's not showing up. So the other thing that you can look at on an HTMA that I kind of want to put in here is iodine deficiency. I don't know, do you guys so iodine is not stored in the hair, so it's not going to be properly measured when you see, you're not going to see it on an HTMA. You can measure it doing a loading 24-hour urine test where you take 50 milligrams of iodine in a capsule, iodoral capsule, and then collect 24 hours worth of urine. If the body is sufficient, most of the iodine will be excreted in urine. If the body is deficient, then you're not going to see that high of a level. You can also get the other halides tested. So you can test for fluoride, bromine, chlorine, and those will also be seen because as you add in iodine at a high level, some of those are going to be kicked out of the receptors that they're blocking, and you'll see those excreted in the urine too. So another way to assess iodine from an HTMA is looking at these different levels. So there's on the HTMA, I'll show you guys afterwards. Remind me to show you my HTMA report. Write that down real quick. So you might see higher calcium levels on an HTMA because iodine is also helps decalcify things. It's one of the first go-tos when I see anybody that has a calcium shell is to slowly start adding in iodine. Potassium less than 4, copper over 2.5, but it also might be super low. Selenium less than 0.08, lithium less than 0.004, a mercury greater than 0.02, and then a calcium potassium ratio over 10.1 for the same reason, right? Because it's going to raise calcium and lower potassium. So you're going to see that ratio be super high if iodine is deficient. So, no, I don't know why my pictures are not showing up. There is a way to also look at iodine deficiency using T3 and reverse T3. There are two courses out there that teach it, but Jen always thought that it was better to actually get the iodine loading test. But if you do see a big elevation of T3, um, you know, that might be something. And without this chart, it's really hard to tell you about the slide. So sorry, guys. I will try and fix that. But these are two books that I have gotten and that really help. So if you wanted to do a deep dive into iodine and iodine supplementation, these are the two books that I would say for you to grab and have. Lynn Farrow also has some has a downloadable PDF that you can get. I think I linked it through buying the I did not buy the Iodine Crisis as a paperback. I bought it as a Kindle, I think, download, or maybe it was a Audible. Anyway, through the links that I got from buying those digitally, I got the PDF, so I can share that with you too. But it talks a lot about, how to properly add in iodine and avoid going too much too fast. Oh, and those were our videos on that.